Now I'll be passing the presentation to Dave Woodworth. In his role as president of Terillium, Dave has overseen hundreds of ERP implementations. He's seen the good and the bad and has produced this presentation to help companies who are thinking about a new ERP project understand what they can do to make sure they are successful. Dave, we're very excited to learn about ERP success factors, and welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Laurel. Appreciate that very much. Let me get the screen ready. Well, thank you for everyone joining today's session. As Laurel said, I am the president of Terillium and have been involved with hundreds of ERP projects. Several years ago, I came up with this presentation and I present it to clients, prospects. I even present this on college campuses to some business classes that are focused on ERP. And I did this several years ago because I kind of could see things happening on projects, and clients would ask me, you know, what should we be thinking about? So I created this PowerPoint to present. So hopefully everyone finds it insightful. I'll start off that you're going to see a lot of different success factors. If you don't have one of these success factors, that doesn't mean that your project is doomed for failure. But these are points that you ought to consider as you are about to take that journey. So what I do is I like to break things into categories. And for ERP success factors, I break it down into technology, people, and processes. And we'll start off with the technology. First thing is that ERP software is it's a business tool. It's not going to cause failure by itself, and it's not going to guarantee success. Many times I've heard stories where if a client had a poor ERP project, that they will say it's the software's fault. And you know, if you look at some of the products that you looked at this week, they have thousands and thousands of customers that are live and running their product. So I don't really believe that you can blame it on the software and it's not going to guarantee success. It's just a tool. Another technology things that people don't talk about are things that you need to get started very early on. Data conversions, integrations, and reports. And I'm going to focus specifically on data conversions. That's taking your data from your legacy system and migrating that over to the new ERP system. This is by far, in my opinion, the longest pole in the tent during the ERP project. And a lot of times people don't even start talking about data and data conversions until month 3 or 4. And I encourage you that you should start this before you even begin your project. Most of our clients, their data is not very good. It's missing information, there's duplicates, and so forth. And I was just going to give you a couple examples. We had a client that I presented this PowerPoint, and the CFO said, you know, Dave, I hear it. We've been cleaning up our data. We're ready to go. And we get started, and we day one started talking about master data and so forth. And several weeks into the project, we said, okay, we need to start converting the manufacturing data. And we said, we're going to need your bills of material and your routings. And I'm not sure if we have manufacturing companies online today, but those are two key components that you need to convert to have a manufacturing ERP system work. Well, they handed us the bills of materials, and that wasn't a problem. But they came back and said, for our 20,000 finished good items, we don't have routings. In their system, they didn't have to have routings, and routings are what tell you how to make the product, and it costs the labor for that product. So we said, well, at that time we were implementing JD Edwards, and we said, well, JD Edwards needs routings if you want to be able to schedule the floor and be able to cost your product. So they had to spend over 3 months in Excel creating 20,000 finished good routings. We had another customer that we said, all right, we're ready to convert your customer masters. And they gave us a spreadsheet. And we started looking at the spreadsheet, and they had 35 customer masters for Walmart. And they were 35 different Walmarts. It was WALMART, one word, WAL-Mart, WALL Mart, and variations. And it wasn't different ship tos. Over 35 years on this custom legacy system, they had many different people that created customer masters, and over that time, they created all of these duplicate masters, and no one could tell us which one was really the true master. So they had to do a major cleanup of all their customers, and I just use Walmart as an example, but they had dozens and dozens of these that were duplicates. So it's very important. We don't know our clients' data, but the new ERP system absolutely needs good data if you want to get an accurate reporting and have an efficient ERP system. So it's very important to start on that early. Why don't we move forward and talk about some of the people aspects of success factors? The first thing is that this is a business tool, so the argument I make is that this should be owned by the business, this project. And a lot of times our clients will view this as an IT project, and but it's a business system, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So we say that the business should own the project, and IT should be a support arm of the project, a very crucial role on the project, but not owning the project. The goal of the project from a client standpoint should be to create internal experts. So you're not relying on the consulting company forever and ever and ever. So it's very important to get the knowledge transferred from the consulting company to your team so you have some internal experts. Some critical roles on the project from a people standpoint is every project, ERP project, should have a sponsor. This should be a business executive and not an IT executive, and it needs to be someone that has the power to make decisions and someone that is respected within the company. In addition, the client should provide a project manager. The consulting company will be providing a project manager as well, but I argue that this project manager should also be from the business. They should be close to being dedicated to the project, and they have to be able to make decisions and respected because they're going to have all the different departments underneath them on the project. I will tell you that most of our clients give us the IT, someone in IT, like the IT director or whatever, as the project manager. And again, by itself, this is not going to cause failure. But I just make the argument, it's a business tool, should be owned by the business, then I would encourage to have the project manager come from the business. It's very important that all of the executives at the company are bought into the project and play some sort of active involvement in it. It's not meaning that they have their hands on the keyboard, but that they are supporting the team throughout the project. You know, we had a client several years ago that they went with an ERP package and they signed the contracts, and after about a year, they still weren't live, and they asked me to come in and kind of evaluate what went wrong. And one of the things that we noticed is that once they signed the contracts, not one executive had any involvement on the project at all. There was no project sponsor. There was no steering committee. No one was involved. And all of the underlings that were on the project just floundered and couldn't make decisions, and they just couldn't get things done. So we gave them some recommendations and got them on the right path. But it is important that the executives are involved. When you do a project like this, there are different ways you can work with a consulting company. And the best way is in a collaborative approach. That means the client is going to provide a core team, and the consulting company is going to provide a team as well, and they work side by side. The core team from the client has to have adequate time to the project. This is not a 1 hour a week project. Depending on the type of ERP product that you go with, it's going to vary. But we've seen companies give 10 hours a week up to 40 hours a week full time. I will say that that's not typical. I'll say the more typical is probably around 40 to 50% of the week is spent on the project. The other thing is the core team members from the client have to be people you can't afford to lose. I want your A players. As I tell our clients and our prospects, I don't have many clients of ours asking me, hey, Dave, could you give me your C players from the consulting company? They want the A players, and we need the A players as well. And I had a client a couple years ago that I gave this PowerPoint, and he said, Dave, I heard everything you said. And I will tell you, I didn't have all of these slides, okay? It was an earlier version of this deck. And so we show up to the project, and he said, Dave, I'm going to give you 7 internal people on the core team, and I'm going to dedicate them 100% of the time, and I'm going to rent office space a mile from our corporate headquarters so they do not get bothered with their old job. And I sat there, I said, wow, that's best practice. I mean, I've never seen that. This is awesome. This is going to go smoothly. We're going to have a successful project. Well, we get into the project, and about month 3 or 4, I started hearing some rumors. And after I did some digging, what I found out is these 7 core team members, the Friday before we started the project, were going to get handed their pink slips and be let go from the company. And prior to that happening, the CEO said, whoa, let's not get rid of them. You remember Dave said we need to provide people to this project. Let's put them on the ERP project. Well, I can tell you that those people were not the A players. They couldn't make decisions. They weren't trusted, respected, and we spent a lot of time with them trying to get the software configured, and we had to go back and restart because a lot of the decisions were inaccurate. So it is very important that you get the right players on the project. The core team members have to be willing to change and think outside of the box. Obviously, one of the key success factors that I will talk about later is change management. People don't like to change. Well, if the core team doesn't want to change, all you're going to get is your legacy system with probably a different user interface, but they're going to set it up to operate exactly like the old system. And I always tell the executives, why would you do that and spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to make it do what you already have? So it really is important that these core team members are drivers of change. In addition, you got to work as a team. ERP, as you guys know, is a very cross-functional, integrated system. You can't work in a vacuum or in a silo. You got to work together. You got to make decisions together, and the decision you make will impact others downstream. So, in addition, you're going to have to make compromises. Sometimes you may not get exactly what you want because it's for the better of the company as a whole. ERP projects are very detailed. I talked about the data conversions and all of the detailed data that has to come over. But it's configuring, it's testing, it's training, it's all of that. And they have to be able to get into the details. And I had a client one time that gave me a core team and gave me adequate time, and they were respected. They knew the business. They could make decisions. They were willing to change and all the good things. The problem was every one of them were a VP, vice president at the company. They didn't even have a login to their legacy system. So they were not going to be able to get into the detail. They were not going to get their hands on the keyboard. So I had to go back to the project sponsor and said, hey, we need people underneath them that are going to be able to actually test, train, get the data converted, so forth. And they ended up doing it. But that's, again, why I added this slide, is because we need the people that will roll up their sleeves. As I said, it's an integrated system. It's got to be some give and take between departments. It may take one extra mouse click in order entry to make the picker's life or the warehouse people's life much better. And so there are some give and take on these projects. We find that our clients' legacy systems, many of them have been customized for every department, almost sometimes down to every user, to get everything that they want. And with an ERP package, why people go with that is they want to have an off-the-shelf package that is supported by a vendor like an Oracle. And so you don't want to sit there and have to customize everything to make it look like the old system. These systems, J.D. Edwards, NetSuite, ERP Cloud, they are built on best practices, so use them. Don't go customizing things in the software just because you always did it that way. Take advantage of the best practices that these vendors are spending millions and millions of dollars on. So that's a little bit about the people side. We'll talk a little bit now about the process. The first process success factor is you need to have a methodology when you're going through an ERP project. And quite honestly, that's why clients hire companies like Terillium because of methodology. Methodology is strictly how do you do something? What are the steps to implement an ERP project? We know because we've been through hundreds and hundreds of these ERP projects, and we have built a methodology and a roadmap to get us there. A methodology has to be a formal methodology and very structured. It has a list of tasks, some tools, and templates that will be used by the client and our consultants. But it also has to be flexible. I was on a call yesterday with a company that is going through a software selection for a new ERP system, and they asked about our methodology, and they wanted to know if we would be willing to leverage some of the tools that they use internally for other projects. And I said, absolutely. As long as it doesn't hinder the project or slow down the project for whatever reason, we're more than willing to do that. So your methodology has to be flexible. Another process success factor, which should be a no-brainer, is training. It's a no-brainer, but I have been at companies where they went live on a new ERP system, and they call us in and say, hey, we're having trouble. We can't get product out the door. We can't invoice, blah, blah, blah. And So when we start looking at it at this one specific company, what we found out is they never trained the end users. And sure, they gave them a half-hour overview of their area, but they didn't train them on all of the scenarios that they would encounter. And they figured they would just do it as they went live and they started doing their job. They would explain it and they would pick it up really quickly. Well, you can't do that. And training is not a one-time event. It's not a half-hour event at the very end of the project. So I listed here at the bottom of the screen some of the types of training that we do on our projects. When you give us the core team, we train that core team on all the various modules that are in scope. Sometimes we'll supplement it with the vendor training. We go through multiple conference room pilots. Those are the testing sessions during the project. And what those end up being is it's a training exercise because the client is learning the system. We have the end user training, which I talked about, but our consultants are on site quite often during the project. And again, we're not working alone in a conference room all by ourselves. We're sitting right next to your core team. And quite honestly, sitting next to our core team, I'd say 75% of it is training because they're learning and absorbing our knowledge of the software. One of the biggest things that you always hear about is change management, as I brought up earlier. You know, people do not like to change. You know, I bet if we polled the people on the phone today, if you were honest, you would probably say, yeah, I don't really like to change either. You get into a routine and you don't want to change that. Well, I can tell you when you implement a new ERP, things will change. So I have an example that's kind of on the extreme, but just to show you what some of the things that I've seen. We had a client that we were getting into end user training, and we brought in the shipping clerk to train them on how to use the software to ship, you know, the product. And it was an older lady, and she came in and she raised her hand before we even got started, and she said, with the current system, I don't use the system. I just manually write down when I load a truck and ship it. And then I, at the end of the day, go into the office and I hand it to accounting. And the next morning, accounting will enter the shipments into the system that they had. She goes, I've never used this system. In fact, I've never used a laptop or a mouse. So we had to stop and we had to spend over a week with the shipping clerk just training her on how to use a mouse. And we'd go into Excel, we would go into the internet, just showing her how to use a mouse. And a week before go live, she quit and told her company that she goes, I can't do it. I'm not going to change. I'm too old. I'm not going to learn a new system. I had another client that the customer service rep, end user, we were bringing her in for one of the testing sessions, and she's looking at the software screen, and she's like, raises her hand and says, and we go, yeah, you got a question? And she said, there's a problem. And we said, oh, what's the problem? And she said, the screen is not green. And we walk over and we go, what are you talking about? And she shows us the screen, and yeah, sure enough, the software we were implementing, it's a GUI, you know, internet-based system, and it's not green, i.e. green screen. And she said she wouldn't use it. She couldn't do that. She needs the green screen and using the F keys. So they actually had to move her to a different department that did not use the ERP system. But those are just two examples of, I'll say, dramatic change issues. But we see change issues all the time. We'll be in projects and we'll be in a session trying to design a process, and the client will say, we can't do that. Why? Because we always have done it this way. Okay, well, we're going to look at a new way of doing it. Now we can't do that. And so we train our consultants to ask why about 20 times before we elevate it to the project sponsor, saying, you're about to make a mistake and customize the software because your core team can't come to an agreement and use the software as is. But it's important to manage the change. How do you do that? There's a few ways. One way is communicating. Back in the 90s, when we would do ERP projects, a lot of companies were doing it to cut cost. And one of the costs they were cutting was labor. And so you know, people at your company have heard horror stories where people have been laid off after a new ERP system was installed. Well, that was back in the 90s, and yeah, that did happen. But I'll be honest, nowadays, I rarely see that happen. So if you're not going to do layoffs, communicate that to the company. People are scared. And if they think it could happen, they're going to potentially try and fight the change and it maybe even cause issues on the project. So communication is key. Communicating includes the goals. At the beginning of the project, we typically will write a charter with the client on why are you doing this project. And when we get into sessions or meetings where people are fighting the change, we'll go back to the board and pull out that project charter and the goals, and we say, remember the goals of this project. And we always try and come back to that. So you have to communicate those goals to everyone at the company. You need to update not just your core team, but the entire company of the project. Celebrate things like key milestones, but let the company know. Remember, these projects aren't 2 weeks long. They could be 4 months, they could be 6 months, they could be a year plus long. So that's a long time to go without hearing anything that's going on. All they do, if you don't communicate, they're just hearing rumors that, oh, it's going bad. So communicate the positive news. Another thing that I see on almost every project is analysis paralysis. Many of our customers have that 35-year-old custom legacy system. And we'll get into sessions, I don't care what it is, order to cash, procure to pay, you name it. And they'll want to sit there and have countless numbers of meetings on a very specific topic. And they can't come to a decision. They want to analyze it every which way. And I usually, this slide, I tell the sponsors and the executives, listen, I guarantee you, you did not build your 35-year custom legacy system in 6 months and then never, ever, ever changed it or touched it again. So my advice is make decisions quickly. Obviously, make sure you're making some smart decisions. Test the decision, get it live, and guess what? You can make changes afterward. I had a client where it was the quoting process for customers. They had a very specific way that they quoted their customers' pricing. And so we said, okay, here are 3 ways that you can do it inside the software. 1 is doing it this way, 2 is this way, and number 3 is we would have to do a modification. And they decided, well, let's do A. Okay, we'll do A. And so we configured the system with A. 6 weeks later, we were going through a testing session of this A, the quoting, and someone came in the room and said, wait a minute, that's not going to work. And this person was not in the original meeting and said that won't work for these 4 reasons. So we had to stop, go back to a meeting, and we went back to the decision A, B, C, and they went to B. and we had to reconfigure the software. 6 weeks later, we go into a test, and guess what happened? It happened again. Someone said, I don't think that's going to work. We're going to have to go back to the drawing board. So my point is, that's one example. You are making hundreds and hundreds of decisions on these projects, and it's important to make decisions quickly. When I talk to companies and they say, yeah, our ERP project was a failure. Oh, okay. How did you measure that? Well, I went over budget. Okay, well, that's one measure. Why else would you say it was a failure? And most of the time, they can't give it to me. So my point is, if you want to know if your project is successful or not, you need to measure it. So as part of our approach to ERP projects, we come up with specific measures for the project. And we measure them every week. And we go through it with the client and we say, do you agree? And we get sign off. Every week we're measuring it. So when we get to the end of the project, and if people are saying, boy, this project was a failure, I'd be like, okay, let's go back to the 28 reports that we created every week. And you signed off that it was green, 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 yellow, yellow, green, 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 go live. So it is important. Measure things, but make sure you got the right measures. Those are the ERP success factors that I had for today. I will stop here for a minute and let Laurel take over. And if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to address those.
All right, great. Thanks, Dave. Thank you for that. Thanks for sharing your expertise and sharing some of those real-world examples. I think it really helps illustrate the importance of these success factors. Okay, so I don't believe this was showing during the intro when I shared how to send in questions. So showing real quick how you do that. We do have a couple, but while we go through those, please send in any other questions you might have. So first question for you, Dave, and I think you touched on this a little bit, so we'll see if you have anything else to add. Does Terillium use a methodology for projects?
Yes, we do. We follow our success factors. So we have a formal methodology. Just at a macro level, we came up with this. It's launch, initiate, integrate, educate, and go live. And then we have obviously subtasks underneath those major phases. And then we have tools and templates that we bring to the project. One of the biggest tools that we use on our project is SharePoint. SharePoint is used as a repository for all the documentation, but it also houses all the issues, tasks, as well. We store all of the test scripts and results of every testing scenario that we do on projects. So it's kind of a one-stop shop that everybody has access to. So yes, definitely have a methodology.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that. Okay, another question for you. Smaller companies have employees that wear multiple hats. How do we handle that when planning a project?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, from my perspective, most of our clients are pretty lean. It's not like they have 15 people just sitting around with nothing to do and they say, go ahead and go on the ERP project. So it is a balance, but as you saw from the success factors, this is not a 1 hour a week job. So I can just give you some examples. I've had some companies backfill some of the positions. I've had companies tell me, Dave, I can't give you more than 10 hours a week, and we are okay if we extend the timeline to accommodate that, and that is what would happen. I can't do a 6-month project if you're only going to give me 10 hours a week, I'm going to have to expand it. So we can play with things like the timeline as well. The other thing we do is, can you give us multiple people but more part-time? So maybe someone's got a real specialty in pricing, but another person can handle the sales order entry piece. So maybe we can split up roles so you don't have someone 50% of the time, but maybe someone is spending, 10 hours a week, and then the sales order person is spending 10 hours a week. But what we do is we work with our clients to come up with the ideal scenario.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for that. It doesn't look like we have any other questions. I did pull up our contact information. If you think of anything afterwards, please reach out to us with any additional questions. And I want to thank you again, Dave, for your time today and for all the information you shared. And thank you, everyone, for joining us and for joining us this week for the ERP web series. And we hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.